Greetings, friends. My name is Pavel Stelmach, and I'm glad to present for you the new episode of our daily wrap-up series. In exactly 1 year, presidential elections are to be held in Russia. Well, like elections, they're imitation. After all, do you really believe that there can be free democratic elections in Russia? I'm not. Although considering how Putin wiped out all the opposition in the country, it is possible that the results will be true. After all, we cannot say that Russians do not support their current president. If they did not support him, there would be more protests in the country. But they are not there, because it was banned. Well, that is, they didn't ban it, but they made it so that any of the protesters could be detained at any moment, even for a completely white sheet of paper. It is a sheet with 8 stars, because it is veiled inscription "No War". In Russian it is 8 letters. In this way, ordinary people cannot express their opinions in public, and if you are a politician, you will be either killed like Boris Nemtsov, or they will try to poison you like Alexei Navalny. If that doesn't work, they will just go to jail. For what? They will find. Especially since a law was recently passed under which you can be imprisoned for discrediting the Russian military. Do you know what discrediting is? This is an admission of the crimes in Bucha. It is simply a criticism of the work of the component centers or a disagreement with the activities of a military leadership. And sometimes it is just an insult of a military man. It doesn't matter what he does. Even if he commits a crime, you can't criticize it. For any country, elections are a time of political instability. After all, the candidates begin to criticize each other, offer other directions for the development of society or government spending. It is good that everything will be calm in Russia, because they will still choose Putin or whoever he says. This is Russia, a country of heredity, not democracy.
Serious protests on the streets are possible only when there is confusion and vacillation among the elite. And when part of the elite is ready to support street protests, then these protests gain serious momentum. And united with this part of the elite, they can lead to a real political change.
I would like to remind you that next year Putin's second term ends. That is already his fourth, and to be honest, his fifth in general, because as prime minister he ruled the country, and Medvedev only performed the role of the president. But in order to stay in power, Putin changed the constitution and reset his terms to 0. So we can expect that he will be in the power until 2036, if he is alive and not in prison by then, because a tribunal over the political leadership of the country is already being organized, no matter how the Kremlin blocks the process. By the way, we haven't talked about the fact that Putin may have declared war and there won't be any elections at all, because now they call the war against Ukraine a special military operation, but to raise the morale of Russians, they can also declare a great patriotic war. After all, taking into account the losses of the Russians on the battlefield, the Moscow generals will soon have to announce a new mobilization, and perhaps there will be no need for a new one. It hasn't stopped since September.
Changes in the society begin when 50% of conformists begin to fall off the pro-Putin core. What does Putin's fears mean? Fear can only be overcome by another fear. And when people will experience fear that they will come and take away their son, brother, husband, father, and kill them at the front, in order to realize that people are being killed at the front, one must understand it from personal experience, because they won't tell this on TV. It is necessary to face this from personal experience so that this fear of losing a loved one turns out to be worse than the fear of getting a club on the head.
What the elections in Russia will be like in 2024, no one can say for sure. Even Russian political scientists and political technologists, because this decision will be made by one person, Putin. And what is in his head is difficult to understand, because how can you understand the person who unleashed the biggest war in Europe since the Second World War? Moscow has stepped up a disinformation campaign to divert attention from its invasion of Ukraine. The US State Department's Center for Global Engagement has published a new report that reveals Russia's attempts to spread misinformation about biological weapons allegedly being developed by the US military in Ukraine. The report does not contain new information about the campaign stepped up by the Kremlin immediately after the invasion of Ukraine, but rather a comprehensive overview of the wide ranging efforts that Moscow has been undertaking in this regard for many years. I recall that a senior State Department official said that Russia and China are clearly united on propaganda and disinformation regarding the war in Ukraine, and that the US and the West have not paid attention to combating such disinformation for years. The authors of the report note that Russia, like the Soviet Union before it, has for decades made false claims about biological weapons in an attempt to instill distrust in global peace efforts and public health institutions that counter biological threats.
In attempting to justify Russia's 2022 invasion, the Kremlin falsely claimed the West refused to negotiate even as Moscow walked away from negotiations. Attempting to justify continuing the war, the Kremlin falsely claims the West seeks to dismember Russia and destroy Russian culture. To help the people of Russia accept the lie that Moscow rightfully attacked its neighbors, whom many Russians consider a brotherly people, the Kremlin says the West has zombified Ukrainians. In this distorted version of reality, Russia can argue it is now not fighting brotherly Ukrainians, it is fighting zombified, neo-Nazi, Satanist Ukrainians. To make Russia's losses palatable, the Kremlin pretends it is not at war with Ukrainians, but nobly fights in Ukraine to defend its sovereignty against the incursion of the West. Report of Global Engagement Center of US Department of State.
The report just cited provides numerous examples of disinformation that Russia has spread since the start of the war, including one of its most notable false claims that the United States was working with Ukraine to build an army of migratory birds, mosquitoes, and even bats to deliver biological weapons to Russia, which, according to the authors and the opinion of Ukrainians and all thinking people, is absurd. But we understand that the false claims are spread through the Russian system of disinformation and propaganda, such as Kremlin funded media outlets and websites linked to Russian intelligence, and so called experts who talk to the Russian press.
This war in the last year has shown how Russia has worked out all possible technologies for disinformation. We have encountered deepfakes, we have encountered fake audio messages, we have encountered fake documents and fake videos. They used everything. The most important thing here is this fleeting quick effect, which is designed for the audience. No one will understand and analyze the sound. No one will analyze the technical component of such content, and such fake audio and video work very quickly, and the audience reacts very much to them. Therefore, Russian propaganda uses such technologies.
And that is why it is very important to check where this or that information comes from, whether from official sources or from an uncle of an acquaintance who studied with Zelensky and knows everything for sure. However, what works with ordinary people does not always work with documents and diplomats. Russians can make up as many different stories as they want, but the Hague Court, on the basis of the collected evidence, recognized that the MH17 flight was shot down by the Russians, that the occupation of Donbass began in 2014, and that Ukrainian territory was already under the control of the Kremlin, because all the lies that Russia invents eventually comes to light. Because if you don't remember, Putin once said that during the annexation, the military without chevrons were definitely not Russians, and later he gave out medals for the annexation of Crimea. He said that in Donbass there are ordinary miners and tractor drivers. Now the Kremlin can tell that the explosions on the threads of the Northern Stream are the work of Ukrainian special services, but Ukraine has nothing to do with the explosions at Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines. There is no evidence that the Ukrainian government was aware of or behind them. Such accusations against Ukraine are dangerous and wrong, and statements about Ukraine's alleged involvement in sabotage are beneficial to those who aim to weaken international support for Ukraine and slow down the deliveries of arms. We emphasize that this false narrative can also be beneficial to certain groups which oppose further strengthening of sanctions on Russia because their business or trade with the aggressor state are in jeopardy. It is imperative to wait for the official outcomes of the ongoing investigation, which is being conducted by Germany, Sweden, and Denmark. Ukraine's authorities urge everyone to keep in mind that Russia's hybrid aggression has many different faces and constantly resorts to full-fledged information operations, disseminating conspiracy theories, or even launching false flag operations. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for watching us and stay tuned for future videos. Goodbye.